I knew something was off the second I saw tire tracks in the gravel that didn't belong to me. My ranch sits on the edge of the Maplewood Hills HOA boundary, technically inside it, but I've got 5 fenced acres, horses, and a private gate at the front. I've lived here 10 years, never had a problem. Until Regina Jameson. Regina, the newly elected HOA president, was the kind of woman who thought a clipboard gave her divine authority. Mid-50s, frosted hair, always in some pastel cardigan, and always using the word community standards like it was scripture. She'd been living up the road for less than a year before she decided my ranch gate disrupted the visual harmony of the neighborhood. Her words, not mine. The thing is, my gate isn't even visible from the road unless you drive up to my property line, which she clearly had. So when I rolled out of bed at 6 a.m., ready to feed the horses, and found my gate welded shut with a thick metal bar across it, I nearly tore the truck door off its hinges. There was a bright orange sticker slapped right on the post, non-compliant structure. Closed until further notice, Maplewood Hills HOA. I stood there, stunned, before muttering, "You've got to be kidding me." I called the sheriff. He took one look and said what I already knew: private property. "They can't touch it without a court order," he said. "Want me to file a report?" "Absolutely." He took pictures, logged the complaint, and promised to follow up. Meanwhile, I had to cut the metal bar myself just to get to my own barn. The horses hadn't been fed yet, and I was furious. Welding someone's gate shut. That's not just a violation, it's a crime. Later that afternoon, Regina strutted onto my property like she owned it, heels clicking over the gravel like it was a catwalk. "Mr. Claymore," she said, holding her clipboard like a badge, "your gate violates the HOA's uniform fencing guideline." "You were notified." "Regina, you taped a notice to my mailbox 2 days ago. That's not legal notice." "You had time to rate it," she insisted, "and the board voted unanimously. The gate stays closed until you replace it with a compliant one." I stared at her. "You welded it shut." "That was necessary to enforce the closure," she said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I gestured around. "This is private property. You broke in and vandalized my gate. That's criminal trespass." She smiled like I was the unreasonable one. "Then maybe next time you'll read the bylaws, Mr. Claymore." Oh, I read the bylaws that night. All of them. Line by line. And nowhere did it say the HOA had the right to alter or restrict access to private property, especially agricultural land zoned outside residential fencing codes. I even called my lawyer buddy who used to work zoning cases in the county. He confirmed Regina had overstepped. Big time. So the next morning, I installed spike strips just past the gate. Not the cheap plastic kind, no, real steel ones, the kind you'd see at a secure facility. Retractable, controlled by a switch in my barn. I left one of Regina's HOA flyers folded neatly on the post right next to them, and a laminated sign. "Unauthorized vehicles may be disabled." That afternoon, I heard the crunch. Then the hiss. Regina's brand new luxury SUV was nose deep on the strip. Flat tires, all 4. She stood in the middle of the road, mouth gaping, hands flapping like a goose having a panic attack. I walked up slowly, arms crossed. "Didn't see the sign?" "You did this on purpose," she shrieked. "Sure did," I said. "Private property." "You're trespassing again. You're going to pay for this." "Nope, you are. I'll be sending you the bill for the spike strips and the welding damage. Already filed the police report. You welded my gate shut, Regina. I've got it all on camera." Her face went pale. "You called the police?" "Yup. And they're very interested in what you did to my property." Regina didn't say another word. She just climbed into her deflated SUV and slammed the door shut. I watched her sit there, fuming, while steam curled off her tires. This wasn't over. But neither was I. Deputy Arnold showed up the next morning with a clipboard and a camera. He wasn't in any hurry, which I appreciated. The guy had handled worse out here, and the way he took his time walking the property told me he was already leaning my way. "4 tires, huh?" he said, crouching beside the metal strip. "Looks like they were all dropped right on top of it, too. You didn't trigger them, right?" "Nope," I said. She drove onto the property after I posted a clear warning, signs laminated, foot from the gate. Lit at night, he nodded, pressing his thumb to the corner of the sign. Still warm from the sun. That's not coming off easy. Mind if I take photos? Help yourself. I've got camera footage too, one at the gate, 2 more on the barn and the fence line. Want the files? Yeah. Sheriff's office will need copies for the report. She's saying you booby-trapped the road. I raised an eyebrow. Booby-trapped? This isn't a war zone. She's using the term intentionally. Said she's filing a complaint with the county board. Claims you're a safety hazard to the neighborhood. She came onto my land. Again, I said. Same as when she had my gate tampered with. I've got footage of them doing it too. Torch sparks, license plates, the works. Arnold gave me a look that said he wasn't surprised. You planning on pressing charges? She tampered with my access to livestock. That's not just trespassing, that's interfering with agricultural operations. I already sent a notice through my attorney. He jotted something down. Wasn't aware of that angle. That'll help. As he walked back to his cruiser, a dusty beige sedan rolled up and stopped behind the gate. The man who got out was in a wrinkled blue suit, tie slung over his shoulder, and a folder tucked under one arm. He looked around like he already regretted being here. Name's Curtis Dunn, he said, offering a hand. I'm with the County Legal Division. Got a call from Maplewood Hills HOA this morning. They're claiming you're violating a compliance order. There's no such order, I said, he sighed. I figured, I looked it up before I came. No official permit, no zoning adjustment request. They didn't even file a grievance with the county clerk, just a complaint letter. Handwritten? Deputy Arnold chuckled from behind his sunglasses. Guess they wanted to skip the boring steps and jump straight to torching gates. Dunn handed me the folder. Inside were copies of the HOA's complaint, along with a letter from their Architectural Review Subcommittee. It had no signatures, no county stamp, just some typed-out nonsense about aesthetic violations and unauthorized perimeter control. They're trying to make it sound like you've erected a barrier around public land, Dunn explained. But this is clearly zoned private and agricultural. They'll have a hard time making that stick. I want to file a counterclaim, I said. I'll pay the filing fee today. I want this on record. What they did was deliberate and it wasn't the first time, he nodded slowly. You've got grounds. Especially with the livestock angle, that's a protected class under state ag law. Welding shut a livestock gate. That could be considered endangerment. I glanced at the folder again. You think they'll back off? Not this HOA, he said. They're too deep in. They'll double down before they admit they screwed up. He was right. The next day, I got a letter slid under my barn door. No envelope, no stamp, just a single sheet of paper on HOA letterhead with the words "Final Warning" in bold across the top. It accused me of hostile deterrent installations, demanded I remove the dangerous spikes, and threatened a forced compliance action if I refused. That same afternoon, my neighbor, Illy Martinez, knocked on the side of my barn with a gloved hand. He was a quiet guy, ex-lineman, worked for the electrical co-op. You got a minute? He asked. Sure, what's up? He stepped inside and pulled off his cap. They sent me a notice too, said my tool trailer's an eyesore. I've had it parked behind the hedgerow for years. Now it's suddenly a violation. They're targeting anyone who doesn't fit their mold, I said. You think they're gearing up for something bigger? He looked uneasy. I heard Regina talking to someone on her porch late last night. I was walking the dog. She said something about getting the county to condemn the fence line and forcing forfeiture through non-compliance. I stared at him. They're planning to seize property? Sounds like it. She mentioned your name twice. That evening, I met with my attorney, Dana Reeves. She was a former county prosecutor who switched to private practice after burning out on criminal court. Sharp as barbed wire and twice as direct. They're bluffing, she said, flipping through the documents. But it's a dangerous bluff. If they push hard enough and if the wrong official gets involved, they could trigger a code inspection. If they find even one technicality, they'll try to leverage it. What's our move? We hit first. injunction for trespass, one for tampering with livestock infrastructure, and a cease and desist order naming the HOA board personally, not the organization each member. That'll scare the ones who didn't realize how deep Regina's gone. And if they ignore it, then we escalate. Civil suit for property interference. We'll subpoena their meeting minutes, emails, any communication related to your gate. If they've been coordinating off books, it'll show up. And if there's evidence of a plan to seize or condemn land without due process. They're in trouble. Serious trouble. By the end of the week, the papers were filed. Illy and 3 other neighbors signed affidavits backing me up. Even the sheriff's office issued a formal statement confirming the HOA had acted without jurisdiction. I posted copies of the injunction on my gate posts, laminated and weatherproofed, just like the warning signs. One of them was addressed directly to Regina. Cease all unauthorized entry or face criminal prosecution. The next day, I found a drone hovering over my paddock. It dipped low, circled twice, then zipped back toward the tree line behind the HOA clubhouse. I called Dana. "They're trying to catch you violating something," she said. "Fence height, animals too close to the property line, anything they can document." "Is that legal?" "Not if it's being operated from your land without consent. Get the footage. We'll add it to the harassment claim." So I did. One of my security cams caught the exact moment the drone entered airspace over my fence. I tracked its flight path, matched it to GPS, and located the operator, a tech consultant named Byron, who conveniently happened to be on Regina's compliance oversight committee. The following day, Dana sent a notice of violation to Byron's employer, citing misuse of equipment on private land. That same afternoon, he quit the committee. But Regina wasn't done. She called an emergency HOA meeting and invited a local journalist from the county paper. Claimed she was protecting the neighborhood from rogue landowners endangering the harmony of Maplewood Hills. I showed up 10 minutes before it started, dropped copies of the injunctions on every chair, and stood in the back with my arms crossed. When Regina tried to speak, her voice wavered. She pointed at me and said, "This man has installed hazardous devices and refuses to obey lawful aesthetic regulations." The room went quiet. I stepped forward. "Everything I've done has been legal, documented, and in response to criminal interference with private agricultural property." I turned to the reporter. "If you want a real story, ask why the board never filed a single legal notice with the county before taking action. Ask why they vandalized a gate that protects livestock. Ask why they're using drones to spy on residents." Regina tried to cut in, but the room had already shifted. People turned toward her, not me. Ellie stood up next. "I've lived here 20 years. This board never bothered anyone until she took over. Now they're threatening to condemn property. That's not community, that's coercion." The journalist took notes furiously. Regina's mouth opened, then closed. I watched her sit down, her posture stiff, face flushed with something between anger and realization. They'd pushed too far. And the neighborhood was starting to see it. By the following Monday, the HOA office was unusually quiet. No patrols, no flyers on doors, no clipboard warriors pacing driveways. It was like the entire committee had gone underground, but I knew better. They were regrouping, not retreating. I spent the morning reinforcing the fence line at the north edge of the property. I'd found fresh boot prints there, ones that didn't match mine or Elise. They weren't deep enough to be from someone heavy, but the stride told me whoever it was had been moving quickly, maybe trying to avoid being seen. Around noon, Dana called. Her voice was clipped and focused. "The county court just served an emergency motion from the HOA's legal rep. They're claiming you're obstructing public access by installing military-grade deterrents. They want an injunction against you." I wiped sweat from my forehead with an oil rag. "On what grounds?" "There's no easement across my land. They're arguing implied access due to years of open movement through the bordering trailhead." Says you've unreasonably restricted historical community use. That trail's been closed off since before I bought the place. They're banking on the judge not knowing that. But here's the kicker: Regina submitted a notarized affidavit stating the gate was always unlocked until she secured it for safety. She's framing the welding as a precaution. I dropped the rag. That's perjury. And easily disproven. Your footage shows the welding crew arriving pre-dawn. No safety signage, no county presence. And I just got a call from the welder's shop. One of the apprentices is willing to testify they were told it was an emergency lockdown authorized by code enforcement. They impersonated a county officer? Looks like it. That takes this into criminal territory. By 3 that afternoon, 2 plainclothes detectives from the county fraud unit met me at the barn. They were quiet men, methodical, and they asked to see the footage without preamble. I loaded it on the laptop, and they watched in silence as the torchman cut through my padlock and began sealing the gate. The taller detective leaned forward. You said the workers were told this was a county matter? That's what the apprentice told my attorney. Said they even showed him a fake permit. He nodded once. That's felony fraud. If a private citizen orchestrated this under the pretense of government authority, it becomes impersonation. We'll need to speak to the welder directly. I handed him a printed copy of the security footage timestamps, along with photos I'd taken of the welding truck's plates. He tucked them into his folder and gave me a look that said this had just escalated beyond a property dispute. The next morning, I pulled into the feed store in town, and the owner, a grizzled man named Bert, who'd been running the place since I was a teenager, flagged me down. You hear about the HOA office? He asked, eyes wide under his beat-up ball cap. Some folks from the DA's office showed up this morning, hauled out boxes of files. That explained the silence. I swung by Ellie's workshop on my way back. He was welding a gate bracket, but he shut it off when he saw me. They're investigating Regina, I told him. Impersonating a county officer. Filing false affidavits, maybe more, he nodded slowly. I figured something big was coming. You know that guy who mows the common areas? He said Regina paid him cash to move a survey stake. Which one? The one behind your horse paddock. Said it was in the wrong place and told him to shift it 20 feet west. That was a bombshell. If she'd altered a boundary marker, that meant she was laying groundwork to claim part of my land was within HOA jurisdiction. Dana confirmed it later that day. We pulled the original survey. Sure enough, the stake was moved. We've got the drone footage from before and after, and the timestamps line up with the landscaper's work logs. They were trying to redraw the property lines. Illegally. That's land fraud. The county's in full gear now. They've assigned an investigator from property crimes. The next week was a whirlwind. Investigators combed through the HOA's financial records and uncovered misappropriated funds. Thousands earmarked for trail maintenance had been rerouted to compliance operations, which, as it turned out, included paying the welding crew, hiring the drone operator, and even purchasing a set of motion-activated cameras that had been discreetly installed facing my property. I only found those after a storm broke one loose from a tree limb. It had been zip-tied to a branch, aimed directly at my barn's side door. The camera's serial number traced back to a purchase order signed by Regina. That was the final nail. The county issued a warrant for her arrest. She was taken into custody during a scheduled HOA board meeting right in front of a dozen stunned residents and 2 local reporters. The footage went viral before the night was over. I didn't watch it. I was busy helping Ellie set new fence posts along his eastern lot line. He'd decided to expand his workshop now that the HOA was in shambles. You think they'll dissolve it? He asked, hammering in a steel bracket. Depends on what the residents want. But I know there won't be another Regina. 3 weeks later, the county held a public forum to address the future of Maplewood Hills HOA. The turnout was massive. Over 200 residents packed the community center, some standing in the aisles, others waiting outside just to hear what would happen next. I was asked to speak, but I declined. Instead, I stood in the back and listened as others shared their stories. A retired couple described how the HOA fined them for planting native wildflowers instead of the approved, uniform sod. A single mother talked about being cited for leaving her garbage can at the curb an hour too early. Even the local mail carrier weighed in, saying she'd been harassed for delivering to homes with unregistered mailboxes. By the end of the night, the crowd voted overwhelmingly to suspend all HOA operations pending a formal audit and restructure. The county agreed to supervise any future board elections and mandated independent oversight for the next 5 years. The last item on the agenda was the renaming of the trail system. Someone suggested Claymore Path, and the room broke into applause. I slipped out before the vote was counted. Back at the ranch, the horses were already settled in for the night. I walked the fence one final time, checked the new motion lights, and locked the gate. My gate, welded whole again and stronger than ever. There were no drones, no trespassers, no orange stickers. Just the sound of crickets, the low rustle of wind over grass, and the quiet knowledge that this time, the right side had won. The county's formal audit of the Maplewood Hills HOA was underway within a week. The forensic accountant assigned to the case was a lean, no-nonsense woman named Maureen Kessler. She wore steel-rimmed glasses and a look that suggested she'd seen every flavor of financial mischief. Dana introduced us in her office, where blueprints, file boxes, and legal pads had taken over every horizontal surface. "Regina's records are a mess," Maureen said, flipping through a binder with surgical precision. "Receipts for landscaping services that were never performed. Cash withdrawals labeled emergency beautification. And this," she slid a photocopy toward me, "is a signed check for over $9,000 made out to a company called Glenhall Compliance Consulting." I read the name twice. "Never heard of them." "They don't exist," Maureen replied. "No business license, no tax ID, nothing. It's a shell." Dana tapped her pen against her notepad. "That's likely how she paid for the welding, the drone surveillance, and the camera equipment. She funneled HOA dues into a fake firm and used the cash to bankroll her enforcement campaign." "She used a fake company to fund her personal vendetta?" I asked. Maureen nodded. "And if we can trace the withdrawals to personal use, it's embezzlement. The sheriff's office is already lining up charges. Between the impersonation, the fraudulent property lines, and this, she's looking at prison time." By the end of that week, the HOA's former treasurer, a man named Harold Brewster, reached out to Dana. He'd been silent through the ordeal, but the county's investigation had shaken something loose. We met him in a quiet corner of a church fellowship hall where he sat hunched over a stack of documents. "I didn't know the extent of what she was doing," he said, his voice low and dry. "She brought me on board after firing the last treasurer, said she wanted someone who wouldn't get bogged down in bureaucracy. That should have been my first warning." "Why come forward now?" Dana asked. "She forged my signature on at least 3 checks," he said. "I've got the originals. They don't match my writing. And I found this." He handed us a red folder, meeting minutes she never filed with the county. She held secret votes with only 2 other board members present. Used those to justify everything from surveillance to compliance raids. "Raids?" I asked. She had a list. Names of properties she wanted corrected. Yours was at the top. She called it a priority restoration zone. Dana's eyebrows lifted. "You willing to testify?" Harold nodded. "I've already signed a statement. I should have spoken up sooner." That folder tipped the scales. The DA's office filed a full criminal case against Regina and 2 of her closest board members. Charges included fraud, conspiracy to commit property theft, and unauthorized surveillance. But there was one detail that hadn't surfaced yet, and it was about to blow things wide open. One evening, I was walking the east fence line when I noticed a metal marker half buried under the brush. It was an old-style survey stake, rusted but still legible. The problem? It was several yards inside my property, hidden behind a false row of newer stakes Regina's crew had installed. I flagged it and called Dana. "That's the original boundary," she said when she came out the next morning, "the one legally recorded with the county." If she had these buried to hide the true property line, it's not just fraud, it's evidence tampering. We brought in a licensed surveyor, who confirmed it. Regina had physically relocated multiple markers across 3 properties to justify her claim that the HOA had jurisdiction. She wasn't just overreaching, she was manufacturing the illusion of authority. The surveyor filed an official correction report with the county assessor's office. Within days, the assessor released a public notice voiding any boundary claims made by the HOA during Regina's tenure. 3 homeowners who'd received fencing violations had their citations rescinded. One of them, a retired firefighter named Walt, showed up at my gate with a case of root beer and a worn-out grin. "Thought I'd never see the day," he said, handing me the box. She had me convinced I was going to lose my pension fighting her. Turned out she was bluffing the whole time. That weekend, the county convened a special public hearing. Dana and I sat in the front row, flanked by residents who'd finally come to understand the full scope of what had been done to them. The judge, a sharp-witted woman named Judge Morales, read through the charges with the kind of clarity that left no room for spin. Regina Jameson and her co-defendants stand accused of multiple felonies, including conspiracy to defraud, falsification of government records, and unlawful restriction of private property. The evidence of these crimes was not only documented but corroborated by sworn testimony, digital records, and forensic audits. When the floor opened to public comment, Ellie stepped forward. He didn't say much, just stood tall and spoke plain. "I work with my hands, build things, fix what's broken." What this board did, it wasn't about keeping the neighborhood nice. It was about control and fear. That's not how neighbors should live. He sat down to a wave of quiet applause. Regina didn't speak. Her court-appointed attorney had advised her to remain silent, but her face said enough. The pride, the certainty, the artificial calm, it had all bled out, leaving only someone who'd finally grasped the consequences of their own arrogance. The verdict was unanimous: guilty on all counts. Sentencing was scheduled for the next quarter, with bail denied due to the severity of the charges and risk of further tampering. After the hearing, Judge Morales issued an immediate dissolution order for the HOA board. The organization itself would remain dormant under county supervision, stripped of all power until a full rechartering could be conducted with public oversight and mandatory compliance checks. Back at the ranch, I took down the laminated signs. The spike strips had already been removed weeks ago, but I left the retractable system intact just in case someone else got any bright ideas. The gate swung freely now, rebuilt with reinforced hinges, and a new locking mechanism I designed with Ellie's help. The night after the dissolution order, I invited a few neighbors over for a cookout. Nothing fancy, just ribs, cornbread, and cold drinks in the barn, with the horses milling nearby and a bluegrass station playing low on the radio. Bert from the feed store brought a weathered folding chair and settled in like he owned the place. Walt told stories from his firehouse days that had us howling. Even Maureen stopped by, trading her usual ledger for a lemonade and a quiet seat near the fence. As the fire crackled and the sun dipped behind the hills, Dana leaned against a post beside me. "You know the county's talking about using Maplewood Hills as a case study for HOA reform?" I nodded. "Good. Let someone else benefit from our mess." "You ever think about running for something?" she asked. "You've got the backbone for it," I chuckled. "I've got enough trouble keeping my fence straight," she tilted her head. "Still. Couldn't hurt to have someone on the inside who actually understands the law and respects it." I didn't answer right away. Just watch the horses, watch the smoke curl into the dusk, maybe someday. For now, the land was quiet, the gate was mine again, and the people who tried to take what wasn't theirs were facing justice, the kind that left no room for excuses. No hiding behind clipboards or bylaws. The ranch stood exactly where it always had. And this time, nobody would be welding it shut.